Hey guys, happy Friday. Welcome to Pagan Happy Hour. I hope you all had a great week. I am super excited to chat with you all about our topic today. We will be discussing pagan deities and specifically how you can connect with different pagan gods and goddesses. I know this is a topic that many of you are interested in. And again, thank you for everyone who voted in the poll on my community page. It's been really fun asking you guys what kind of topics you're interested in seeing for these pagan happy hours. So thank you so much for those of you that share your thoughts. So if you are new here, welcome. I do these every Friday at 5 p.m. Central, and they are a way for us to all chat and connect in the pagan community. I pick a weekly topic, and we just discuss things, and this is really meant to be a two-way conversation. So I'm going to be looking over here at the chat from time to time. I'm going to be bringing in your thoughts, your ideas into the conversation. And I'm going to do my best to make sure your ideas are being heard. So thanks for joining me. Thanks for spending a few moments on your Friday with me. If you do enjoy Pagan Happy Hour, there are two ways to support the show. The best way is through my Patreon. I have the link down below. When you become a patron, you gain access to my exclusive pagan Discord server. So if you are looking for an online community of fellow pagans and witches, that is a really good thing to check out, and it's a great way to support the show. The other great way to support the show is through Super Chats, which is the $ button next to the chat box. And through that, you can donate any amount to the live stream, and your comment or question will pop up really big. So I'll be sure to see it and bring your thoughts into the conversation. So those are the two best ways to support the show. And I'd love to hear from you guys where you're tuning in from today and what you're drinking. So let me cue the cocktail music and tell me where you're from. So today I'm having a old-fashioned, extra fancy with 2 cherries this evening. Let me see where you guys are chiming in from. Let's see, we have people from Colorado, Mexico, California, Seattle, Virginia, New Orleans, Canada, Washington, New York, Minnesota, Texas, Pennsylvania, Finland, Slovenia, Massachusetts, New York City, Seattle, Pennsylvania, Netherlands, Italy, Quebec, South Carolina, Southern Ohio, Oregon, South Dakota, Turkey, Chicago, Los Angeles, Ohio, Milwaukee, Georgia. Oh my goodness, we're from everywhere today. So thank you guys so much for sharing. And as I was looking, I did see an interesting question pop up about if the time of Pagan Happy Hour will be changing once I move. So if you've been following me on social media, you might have noticed that I announced that I'll be moving at the end of August. Currently, I am located in the Central Time Zone. I'm in Dallas, but I will be moving to Savannah, Georgia, which is in the Eastern Time Zone. So I have not decided yet, and I'd love to hear from you guys because I know for those of you that are not located in the US or might be watching from Europe, it's pretty late at night. So maybe I should consider moving it an hour up. So it might be 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern, or maybe I'll keep it the same. So I'll probably do a poll shortly after I move, asking you guys if you want to keep the same time or if you want to move it up an hour. So stay tuned for that. And let me turn off the music and we will jump into the topic. Okay, so highly requested topic. This is something I've been thinking a lot about this week, which is how do you connect with deity for us pagans? And of course, like all topics revolving paganism, this is a complicated question because paganism can mean so many different things to so many different groups of people. Though I did kind of come up with 5 different tips or things to consider through your journey of connecting with deities. So I want to go over those with you. But of course, as I'm chatting, I really want to hear your ideas throughout this conversation as well. So the first challenge for us pagans is we kind of need to decide what deity or deities do we want to work with in our personal practice. And this is easier said than done, right? Because unlike the monotheistic religions, we actually have hundreds, potentially thousands of gods to choose from. So picking, one or two deities to build a more closer connection to can be a bit overwhelming at first. And one of the things you want to consider is what your pagan practice is like as a whole. Some pagans tend to follow a specific branch of paganism. So, for example, there are many Norse pagans out there. So, obviously, for those that consider themselves Norse pagan or heathen, they're probably going to want to connect with the Norse gods versus the Celtic pagans connecting with the Celtic gods, or the Hellenistic pagans connecting with the Greek gods. So that may be you. Maybe you particularly follow a branch of paganism, and because of that, you want to just work with that pantheon. So at least that narrows it down a little bit. Though there are many eclectic pagans out there, especially a lot of Wiccans tend to be eclectic, and that means they might choose to work with different deities from a variety of cultures and pantheons. So that is the first thing to consider. What pagan path do you follow? Is your pagan path defined around a culture, a time period, a place? Or is it more eclectic, which is going to really open you up to any potential deity to work with? Let me see. Oh, I have my first super chat from Happy Trees. Thank you so much for your donation that says, "Girl, I love these so much. I will change my schedule for the new time." Thank you. Yes, definitely stay tuned on if I'll be changing the time or not after the move. But thank you again. I really appreciate your support. So I like to hear from you guys. Do you consider yourself a eclectic pagan, or do you follow a specific pagan path? I've definitely changed a lot over the years. I started out as quite an eclectic pagan. I started out as a Wiccan and worked with many different deities across pantheons. But then over the years, I shifted. I'm still not fully within one path, but I do mostly focus on Norse and Celtic paganism. But what about you guys? Let me check your thoughts on this. Let's see. Emily has a great comment here. She says, "Personally, I see deities as very archetypal, with their differences, of course." So that's a good point as well, because when you are eclectic and you're looking at different pantheons, perhaps you work with the goddess of love from multiple pantheons, right? Because you're more focused on the archetype than the specific culture, right? So you can do that. And this is kind of tricky, but my personal views on the deities and what they are has also shifted. And that's a spectrum too. There are some people that consider themselves hard polytheists, right? And they view the individual pagan gods as individual entities, right? Similarly to how the Christians might view their God. So they are individuals that have their own agency, their own morality, their own ability to connect with us here on earth. And then you have the soft polytheists that might look at the deities as more archetypal, are more intangible. So that's up to you to decide as well where you fall on this spectrum of how you view the deities. Personally, I'm a little bit in the middle there, but that's a great comment. And yeah, if you view the gods as archetypal, then maybe you are working with one particular archetype, and you can pick deities that correspond with that archetype. Let's see. And then Mark here is mentioning in the comments, non-theistic paganism works as well. Yes, so you could also be a non-theistic pagan and not choose to work with deities and still call yourself a pagan. So that is an option as well. Let's see. I see a few of you guys mentioning that you consider yourself more eclectic. I see someone mentioning here that they consider themselves more of an animist. So seeing God, seeing spirit, deity in everything. If you are curious or interested in animism, I chose that topic for Pagan Happy Hour a couple weeks ago. So I definitely recommend checking out that episode. Let me see here. Just checking your comments before moving on to the next thing. Okay. So another thing you might want to consider is choosing a deity or several deities that actually fit in well with your interests and your personality. For example, say you are a peace-loving person. Say you're like a vegan and you're just very peaceful. It might not be a good idea to work with someone like Mars, right? It doesn't quite fit your lifestyle, and that might not be a solid connection, solid relationship with that deity. So you may want to think about, well, what are your values? What is your morality? What do you enjoy doing? And maybe choosing a deity that best corresponds with that. So, for example, say you're really into nature, say you are a gardener or a homesteader. Working with one of the nature or fertility deities might make more sense. For example, Demeter or Persephone if you follow the Greek pantheon. Maybe you're a hunter. Then maybe you want to work with Artemis. Maybe you're kind of like a homebody. You like creating cozy spaces for yourself and your family. Then maybe one of the hearth goddesses like Hestia or Bridget might be a good option for you. Or maybe witchcraft is a big part of your paganism, and you might choose to work with one of the more witchy deities like Isis from the Egyptian pantheon, or Hecate or Circe from the Greek pantheon. So that's something to consider. If you're wanting to build a good connection with the deities that you work with should probably fit your interests and your lifestyle. I see I have a super chat here from Peach. Thank you so much. That says, I love Freya because we both have boarded cats and to transfer us from place to place. Yes, Freya is one of my personal favorite deities. And if you are unfamiliar, in the myths, she has a chariot that is pulled by two large cats. And I myself have two cats as well. So yeah, if you're a cat person, Freya might be a good deity to work with, or Bast from the Egyptian pantheon, of course. Or even Sekhmet from the Egyptian pantheon. So yeah, definitely thinking about what is your lifestyle, what is your interest, and what deity might correspond best with that. Let me see your comments and questions here. Let's see. Danny has a funny question. What if you drive around all day for work? Great question. And you're probably going to maybe think about a deity that's associated with travel, like Hermes or Mercury. Let's see. Okay. And of course, too, you should trust your instincts here. If some people feel connected to a certain deity and they don't understand why, maybe it doesn't quite fit in with their lifestyle, their personality, you should still listen to your intuition. So, when we're talking about spirituality, oftentimes we're so used to defaulting to the intellectual in our modern world, but spirituality is really housed in our emotional and intuitive subconscious state, right? So if you start having dreams about a certain deity, if you start feeling connected to a certain deity or feel called to a certain deity and you don't know why, you should still pay attention to those feelings. And that's probably a sign you should work with that deity, because maybe even going outside of your comfort zone in terms of what that deity represents is something important for your own personal and spiritual development. So that's something to consider as well. Let's see. So another thing I should mention is the term patron god and goddess. Now, some pagans have a patron god or goddess, and that is something really popular in Christianity. Sorry, I was just misspeaking because I was reading the comments while I was talking. It's so hard to do these both at once. I meant to say that is really popular in Wicca to have a patron god or a goddess. So if that is the case, that means you usually pick one god and one goddess that you in particular work with. Though this is something that's more associated with Wicca and doesn't necessarily have much of a basis in historical paganism. Before I jump into that, I just want to give a thanks to a couple more super chats. Thank you, Krishna, for your donation. And then also thank you, Sarah, for your donation. She says that she finds inspiration from Christian, Buddhist, and Hindu deities, and that she recently realized that while she thought she was agnostic, she may be Gnostic, and believe in an unidentified divine and all living beings. Yeah, so there are even branches of Christianity, like Gnostic Christianity, that does almost delve into paganism. So thank you so much, Sarah, for your comment and your super chat. So when you think about having a patron god and goddess, that is definitely something you can do. Of course, picking just two to start with might make sense, right? It's a little less overwhelming. Though when we think about how the ancient pagans interacted with deities from a historical concept, they didn't really connect with deities in that way unless you were a priest or a priestess of a particular god or goddess, right? Because you'd have different temples, and in those temples you would have a class of priests or priestesses that works exclusively with that deity. But your average citizen would actually interact with many deities based on whatever they were going through at the moment or whatever they needed help with. So when you think about ancient Rome, for example, these soldiers worked a lot with Mars. That makes sense. They also worked with Mithras, which was a deity that was pretty exclusive to the Roman military. If you were a pregnant woman in ancient Egypt, you might be talking to Hathor, right? Because you'd be concerned about childbirth and child rearing. If you are trying to get pregnant, then you would be, talking to one of the fertility deities. So it was very dependent on what you wanted to achieve in life and what best fit your circumstances. So the ancient pagan peoples would be working with whatever deity kind of fit what they were going through at the moment. So that's a bit different than the concept of patron god or goddess. The idea of a patron god or goddess is more in line with the priest and priestesses of the ancient world. So that's something to just kind of keep in mind. You can definitely do a patron god and goddess if you want, or you can just work with different deities based on your lifestyle and your interests. Let me see here. I see a good question here asking about the term working with. So working with a deity being confusing, and they're mentioning they understand the term worship or devotion or prayer, but working. So that's a great point. Why am I using the term working versus worship? A couple reasons. So I don't consider myself worshiping deities. I think that that's something more akin to the monotheistic religions. While I do honor and respect the deities as something greater and beyond myself, I don't necessarily worship. So I view it more as a connection, a relationship, a working relationship. And that has to do with how we interact with deities in a pagan context. Um, in offerings, in working with deities, we are giving something to the deity so that they can give something back to us, right? So that offering cycle is really important in ancient pagan societies and in many modern pagan practices. So it's like we're on a team, as opposed to a high and mighty deity that we're bowing down to. This is my own personal opinions here on pagan deity, and you are welcome to have your own thoughts and ideas. I also use the term working with a deity because I often incorporate deity in my spell work and rituals. So I view them as being there with me working on this spell or this ritual. So that's why I use the term working with as opposed to worship. So just wanted to clear that up. But again, you are welcome to use the terminology you choose, and you're welcome to view the deities in a more worshipful context if you prefer. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, I see here in your comments, you guys have different ideas on this, and that's totally fine. So yeah, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that idea. So another thing to consider is if you choose to work with a deity or several deities, it's okay if that changes over time because our life changes over time, right? It wouldn't necessarily make much sense for me to work with a deity that is associated with children and childbirth right now because I don't have children, right? And I'm not pregnant or anything like that. So, your life might change, and what deities you choose to work with might also change. And I know there's a lot of guilt there sometimes when you've been working with a deity for 5 years, and then maybe you want to start working with a different deity. And I just want to say that I think that's okay. I think when you look at the historical context here, that there is precedent for that. Among at least the common folk. I mean, if you were a priest or a priestess, that was one thing. You had your deity, your temple, and that's what you did. But for the average citizen in the ancient cultures, they probably worked with different deities throughout their life. So I just wanted to mention that as well, that it's okay if things evolve and change. They definitely did for me. I worked with different deities when I was started paganism when I was like 16, and I definitely work with different deities now. Let's see. Oh, I see we have another super chat here from Sarah. Thank you so much. That says, I have 5 beings that she has altars for. And then let's see. I feel they chose me as their overall strengths are what I aspire to reach a higher self. I take inspiration rather than worship. Yeah, I definitely share that idea that my connection with deity is about inspiration and relationship building as opposed to worship, as we might view the word worship in modern society. Yeah, thank you again for the super chat. Let's see. Oh, great comment here from Betwixt and Between that says, I do not bow or bend my knees to my gods. Instead, I open my arms, embracing them. Oh, that quote almost gave me chills. Like, I totally feel that. That's kind of how I conceptualize my relationship with deities. Let's see. Great comments, guys. Thank you so much for sharing your ideas here. So once you've kind of gone through this monumental task of deciding, okay, this is the deity I want to establish a connection with, or potentially deities, what do you do next? So next, you need to learn about that deity. This is a form of respecting the deity. So we need to research. Are there stories? Is there a mythology around that deity? So spend time doing the research and learning about that particular god or goddess. Some deities we even actually have ancient prayers for, which is amazing, right? So if you follow the Greek pantheon, you have the Homeric hymns, several of which are connected with specific deities. So it's important to learn those if you're working with a god. So looking at the deity and the culture that that deity comes from, what resources do you have? Are there any texts that you should be reading? Are there any stories, mythology, folklore around that deity? Or even are there any rituals and spell work that has already been recorded that you can reproduce in your own practice? So that is a huge part of the process, and it's a huge part of building that respect between you and the deity. It shows that you're willing to put in the time and the effort and the work to build this connection. So once you've spent time learning kind of just about the deities, next you want to kind of figure out, okay, well, how are offerings and prayers done to this deity historically, and how can you start doing that in your own personal lives? I see we have a super chat from Laban. Thank you so much. He says, good conversation. I'm glad you're enjoying it. So when we think about how offerings and prayers were done, this varies greatly based on the culture that your deity is from. Luckily, there is a lot of information out there. Some paths have more information than others, unfortunately. If you're into Celtic paganism or Norse paganism, you're not going to have as much luck finding details as you will if you are looking at Greco-Roman paganism or Egyptian paganism or even some other forms of paganism. So, for example, with prayer, we actually know quite a bit about how the ancient Greeks prayed to their gods. I would recommend, if you are interested in working with a deity from the Greek pantheon, checking out my Hellenism Pagan Happy Hour chat, because I talk a lot about how the ancient Greeks prayed and the specific posture that they took, the specific offerings that they gave, the specific structure of the words for the prayer, so that you can design your own prayers, but stay true and authentic to how it was done in ancient times. So that's really cool. And it's important to kind of know these things. If you want to connect with the gods, you also have to connect with the ancient culture as well. So maybe you are working with an Egyptian deity, right? And if that's the case, then check out last week's Pagan Happy Hour, because I actually talked a bit about ancient Egyptian prayers. And we also have a good amount of historical prayers that you can incorporate into your practice for several different deities, especially if you are working with like Osiris or Hathor or Isis. There are a lot of historical prayers that you can draw upon, which is really cool. I see a question here with a super chat from Sarah. Thank you so much. That says, thoughts on passing on deity statues to others. So again, a great way to honor your deity is also respecting them through your altar, perhaps. How you choose to decorate your altar. Deity statues are something that is ancient, and it can be really powerful when you're ready to purchase a deity sculpture for your altar, or even better, make one on your own. Even if you're not a good sculptor, you can maybe draw an image or something like that. But of course, you can purchase one as well. Her question here was on passing on deity statues to others. I think that's a great idea. Personally, I'm a bit of a minimalist. So anytime that I can share pagan items with others or take on pagan items from someone that doesn't want them anymore, I am all for that type of reciprocity, especially considering the majority of deity statues are made in horrible conditions in China. So if you are wanting to buy a deity statue, I recommend looking on Instagram and maybe trying to find an actual artist or a pagan artist that makes them. That could be pretty cool. But I think it's totally fine to pass on statues of deities, artwork of deities to others. In fact, that could be a really great gift if you have a pagan friend and you know what god or goddess they work with, to get an item for them representative of that deity. Great question. So another thing that you might want to look up is if there are any ancient pagan holidays that are specifically associated with your chosen deity or deities. I'm into this because you know me, I love pagan holidays. I have like hundreds of videos about pagan holidays. But there are some holidays that are associated with specific gods and goddesses. For example, Imbolc is associated with Bridget, or we have Lughnasadh coming up, which is associated with the Celtic god Lugh. So, you know, definitely look that up. And if there are specific holidays that are connected with your deity, those should be really important days for you, important days to celebrate and honor your deity. Let's see, a couple other questions came in here. Let me see here. First one, do you think that in a pre-Abrahamic world, they tended more towards working with or worshiping their gods? In a Hindu context, I think it'd be more towards worship, but it might be tradition specific which way that goes. Great question. And yes, I think there are many pagan cultures that did consider what they were doing as worshiping the deities. But I think it was very divided between how the average citizens interacted with the deities and how the priests and priestesses interacted with the deities. The designated priest class would worship the deity, but your average citizen might work with the deity. So it's different depending on culture, but I think it also was dependent on who you were. If you were a priest or priestess in ancient Rome, for example, yes, you were probably worshiping a deity. If you were an average citizen wanting to get something in your life, you might have a working, almost transactional relationship with a deity. You would leave an offering to the deity so that you would get something back. So it's kind of more working transactional. It's a bit weird nowadays where we don't actually have priests and priestesses in modern society that are pagan. So we actually don't have people whose full-time job it is to worship the pagan gods like it was in ancient times. So most of us tend to fall in the role of the average citizen and tend to develop more of a working relationship. Though if you are fully dedicated, if you are interested in kind of devoting your life towards a particular god or goddess, that would be amazing. If I didn't have to like work for a living, maybe I would consider doing that. So I think there are options here, and there is a spectrum on how you personally would like to work with the deities, and there's a lot of flexibility there. Let's see, another great question here coming in that says, as an animist, I have considered the moon to be a deity. Am I the only one to feel the divine consciousness of the moon, the sun, and the earth? Great question. You are definitely not the only one here. So the idea of a divine consciousness sounds obviously animist. You mentioned you're an animist. And when we think about the earliest forms of spirituality, the earliest forms of religion, they were exactly like that. The sun, the moon, the earth were the first, basically deities, right? So they are so primal, so inherent to us as humans that it totally makes sense to connect with those heavenly bodies as gods and goddesses. And we view them archetypally in many different ways. Of course, we have Mother Gaia for Earth. We have the moon representing several different deities. You might have Nut from the Egyptian pantheon, Hecate from the Greek pantheon. Even in Eastern religions, you have the moon deity or the rabbit in the moon. So of course, folklore around the moon has it connected to several different aspects of the divine. The sun, again, as well, you have Apollo, you have Amaterasu from Japanese Shinto. So, the idea of the earth, the moon, the sun as being divine conceptions is ancient. And is really powerful. Those are really some of the first deities out there. Another kind of really early prehistoric deity is the concept of the fertility goddess. So if you're into art history or anything like that, you might be aware that our first sculptures were actually highly sexualized female sculptures. Venus de Willendorf is one of the earliest. So people created these little figurines, these little fertility goddesses, and those were some of the earliest ideas of deity. So you have, again, kind of the planets, the power of the sun, the moon, the earth, and then you also have this concept of fertility, those being kind of some of the foundational aspects of spirituality from human evolution. So really exciting stuff. Great question. Let's see. A couple other questions came in. Let's see. Is there a deity that is the view of the divine in everything, like pantheism? What deity would that be? So I think you could look at that as like a pantheism or even animism. Animism being the idea that there is a divine consciousness in everything. So yes, I think you can view the world in that way. Many indigenous societies still kind of view the world through that lens as an aspect of the divine in all. Great question. Let's see. Great comments and questions, guys. Let me see. Last super chat before we move on to the next topic. Let's see. I see a question here. Do you have any book recommendations for learning more about the deities, Greek, pagan, Roman, etc.? So book recommendations is a difficult question because it depends on the specific pantheon that you are interested in learning about. So I have lots of history books, on these different cultures, but I tend to shy away from generalized books about paganism because I often find that they are very Wicca focused or a bit vague. And I personally am really into the historical aspect. So when I look at books, it depends on the culture. Last week's Pagan Happy Hour, I talked about ancient Egypt. And I mentioned several books I have. Ancient Egyptian Literature, Volume 1 and 2 are great if you're wanting to find prayers to certain ancient Egyptian deities. A copy of the Book of the Dead is great if you're if you're into ancient Egyptian prayers and spell work. If you're interested in ancient Greek, of course, pick up a book on just mythology, right? So you can kind of see the stories of the deities, but also the Homeric hymns are great to learn about. So it really depends. If you're into Norse paganism, definitely the Eddas, the Havamal. So I tend to start with the primary source texts and then branch out from there. So you want to figure out what are the primary source documents we have from that particular culture, and then you can kind of learn more about the deities through those sources and then expand outward, and you can definitely pick up some more generalized pagan books as well. Let's see. We have a super chat here from Vocatus. Thank you so much. Very generous donation that says, do you think the Venus sculptures were really done by the Gravettian hunter-gatherers? So I am not an expert in kind of ancient art when we're going this far back. So I do not have the answer to that. I do find it fascinating that this is something that is not isolated to one particular area. These so-called Venus figurines were found basically all over the world. So I think it's something inherent in our human biology and psychology that when we think about the most important things in our life, in our culture, fertility and female fertility is a huge part of that. In the ancient world, that made total sense, right? When we're looking at like prehistoric societies, that was something that was really important and would have been viewed as highly spiritually significant. Both the female sexuality and the female fertility, which is why it's so kind of, in my view, heartbreaking that our society shifted towards monotheism, which is so masculine oriented, and feminine sexuality is repressed, because when you look at our human history, feminine sexuality and fertility was something that was viewed as inherently sacred and spiritual. So I think that's something really interesting and could be such a fascinating topic, though I can't go too much into those ideas on YouTube without getting demonetized, of course. But I really recommend looking up the early goddess figurines if you're interested in that. There's a lot there that I think says a lot about who we are as humans and what we view as spiritually significant. So let me see here. So another thing you want to think about is setting up a routine for connecting with your chosen deity or deities. Now, of course, we have the holidays. I love the holidays, which are a great time to connect with deity, but it can be really great to develop a more regular practice of connection as well. So think about what you want that to be. Some people do a morning prayer at their altar. That is something you can do if you want to fit that into your practice. Some people like to do a weekly offering. So picking a designated time of the week and picking what your offering will be. And certain deities actually prefer certain types of offerings. So that's something you want to look into as well. Some deities, you might pour a libation. Some deities, you might use incense. Or if you're working with like a nature deity, maybe you are bringing a basket of fruit outside and leaving it out in nature for the particular deity. So thinking about how you can fit a regular connection with deity into your weekly or daily routine is really important, because when we're working with a deity, this is meant to be a connection, a relationship that you build over time. This is not something that happens at once, right? You really want to think about it as a partnership, a relationship. So this takes time to build that trust, build that connection, and giving offerings is one of the best ways to do that. And it's one of the most historical ways that people interacted with their deity. So often you would give a offering, and historically, at least, they would usually be asking for something in return. That's kind of gift cycle concept. You don't have to do that. You could just start out by maybe leaving offerings once a week, and then maybe down the road, you might start asking for certain things. You might also want to think about, are there any other ways that you can connect with your chosen deity in kind of other ways that fit into your daily life? So, maybe you're a gardener. You love to garden, and maybe you offer a quick prayer to Demeter when you go out and garden. Or maybe it's Flora or Persephone, something like that. Maybe you offer a prayer to Hestia before eating a meal. So, maybe before you travel, you give a quick prayer to Hermes before getting on an airplane, right? So there are so many little ways that you can take a moment to acknowledge and respect the deity that you've chosen to work with. And thinking about how you can fit that into your daily or your weekly routine, and creating space for that time, creating space for those moments can really strengthen and develop that connection. So let's see. Last topic here before, we probably will need to end in a few minutes. I have a dinner coming up. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is, once you've done all of those things, how do you build an even deeper connection? And I had a few thoughts and ideas as well for that. So I am a big fan of guided meditations, as well as astral travel. It can be really fun to try. So if you've built a strong connection with the deity, trying to interact with them in one of these liminal spaces, whether that's in the astral realm, whether that's in the dream realm, to see what wisdom they might have to tell you, can be really powerful. So I recommend trying out astral travel. If that's something you're interested in, I do have a video about journeying into the spirit realm that you can check out if you're curious on techniques for that. Another thing you can try if you are interested in witchcraft is you can ask the deities' help in your spell work. So kind of having them enter into your sacred space and assisting you with a particular spell that might help enhance its effectiveness. So that can be a fun thing to try as well. Another thing you can do is, we talked a little bit about altars, making space for the deity on your altar, getting either a statue or just drawing a picture of the deity. You don't have to buy anything here, or decorating your altar with items that are associated with the deity. Again, you don't need to purchase anything. You can get natural materials, plants, flowers. So many of those things have correspondences with particular deities. You might also want to choose particular ritual clothing if you are doing a ritual to honor your deity, and that clothing could reflect what people wore in ancient times. It doesn't necessarily have to. I know a lot of people have like a robe that they might wear, or they might even do it sky-clad. So it's of course up to you, but that's something you can try. Or maybe you want to donate some funds to a cause that's associated with your deity. Or gosh, if you were lucky enough to have a pagan temple that was associated with your deity, then that could be a good place to donate to as well. So for example, say you follow the Greek pantheon, then maybe giving a donation to the Parthenon or something like that could be a good idea. So those are just a few thoughts on how to kind of deepen that relationship with the deity, different things to try. But again, this is meant to be a long-term process. You're not going to build a strong connection with the deity overnight. And of course, you should develop this connection in a way that feels authentic and comfortable for you. Paganism is an umbrella term. So many different ideas, ritual, prayer structures, and beliefs all fit in with this umbrella. And what makes us pagans awesome is we're not here to tell you what to do. I'm not going to tell you what to do. You have the freedom to choose your own path. So keep that in mind, keep a journal, keep a record, and write down your thoughts and your feelings on deity, how you view deity, how you personally want to connect with deity, and go from there. This is all meant to be a learning process. So I want to thank you guys so much for sharing this conversation with me, and a huge thank you for everyone that donated today. That was a huge help. I really appreciate that. And again, if you are interested in joining my Patreon and my Pagan Discord, I do have the link down below. And if you happen to be interested in tarot, I do have probably 2 spots still open for new tarot students. If you are interested in taking some one-on-one lessons with me, I have the link down below. So definitely sign up before those close up, because my schedule is getting pretty busy, especially with this move coming up. But thank you guys so much. Next week, we will be doing a Lammas party. So we'll be talking quite a bit about the ancient Celtic holiday of Lammas and Lunasa. So stay tuned for that next week. I will see you then. And I got to sign off because I got to head to a dinner. Talk to you soon. Bye.